The question, what is the deep, is not one with an easy answer. In the course of this video, I will lay out what I believe is the most concrete explanation for the concept of the deep. I will highlight three main aspects of the deep, seen through the lens of real-world myths, alongside in-game evidence. And I believe that these myths inspired the deep, and my sources of research will be linked below. My conclusion, ultimately, is that the deep is a symptom, an aspect of the dark, but is different, a different manifestation. The deep is a metaphysical realm filled with dark things. My three main avenues of explanation, each backed up by in-game evidence and real-world mythos, are as follows. Number 1. The dark, or the sin, in the human soul is the heaviest, and it sinks to the depths as a soul dreg, alongside other dark and horrible things. Number 2. The deep is loosely based on the Sumerian myth of the deep water abyss, and is a different metaphysical representation of the dark. And number 3. The flood mythos. The age of deep is an age of dark, brought about by the flooding of the old world, washing away the previous age. So without wasting any more time, let's get into the first point, which is the weighing of the soul. In Egyptian mythology, the journey the soul has to take before it can rest in the underworld is arduous and full of many tests. One of these three tests is the stage known as the weighing of the soul. The soul would be brought before the god Osiris, and Anubis would place it on a scale. These souls that were full of sin would be weighed down by the sin. Now consider this myth for a second while I read the Aldrich-centric item, the human dreg. It says, "Dregs are the heaviest things within the human body and will sink to the lowest depths imaginable." Much like the aforementioned myth, there is a weight disparity when it comes to the soul. The dark part is the heavier part. I postulate that the dark found within humanity are these dregs. They are the heaviest part, and they sink to the depths. If this weight connection to the myth I mentioned before hasn't convinced you yet, consider this final part of the soul weighing myth. These souls that were too heavy with sin would be fed to Ammit, the devourer of souls. The devourer of souls. Now this should make your ears pick up, and to me is no doubt the inspiration where some of Aldrich's mythos came from. And if you still are not convinced, Ammit's form is this. That's right, a quadruped with the head of a crocodile, very reminiscent of the watchdogs found in Aldrich's Covenant Room, a room which is filled with a deep gem, water, and a human dreg. So my point 1 is that the dark within the souls is the heaviest part, and therefore falls into the deep, which is why the deep is becoming a dark and dangerous place. That being said, let's consider the significance of this connection with the weight when we go into point 2. Now point 2 is the deep water abyss, and this is where I talk about what the deep is itself. The Sumerian word Abzu means sea, abyss, as well as primeval source. A variation of this word, Abzu, has been translated into English as deep water. Semantically, we can already see an equivalency between the words abyss and deep water if we look at these languages. Again, highlighting the widely accepted connection between the two in Dark Souls. Wolf Knight's greatsword, or Artorias' sword, which strikes harder against enemies of the dark. Deep associated spells such as soul dregs also deal dark damage. The weapons of the Merkmen, which are from the deep, according to their item descriptions, do dark damage as well, as do the deep gems. So we can accept that in-game there is a concrete relationship between the deep and the dark. Now let's dive into the mythology. Assyrian Babylonian mythology states that Abzu is the embodiment of the freshwater abyss that lies beneath the earth. The ancient Mesopotamian people regarded the abyss of water as a symbol of the unfathomable. In Sumerian and Akkadian mythology, it is also referred to the primeval sea below the void space of the underworld and the earth above. Ultimately, these interlinked ideas show the deep water abyss that exists beneath the earth's fabric of reality. This is how I think of the deep in Dark Souls, and will from now on call it a deep water abyss. An ocean-like realm that exists in the deep places of the world, below the very fabric of the world that we inhabit, rather than it being a fixed geographic location. Instead of trying to tie down exactly what form this dark takes, or how it looks, or how it behaves, consider that it behaves in a number of different ways, and has a number of forms and symptoms. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the cycle of fire has gone on for eons uncounting, unnaturally being extended by the linking of the fire. However, as the fire fades to the point it has in Dark Souls 3, even with all the cycle linking, the dark is rising in numerous ways. We have the undead, the curse of the undead, the abyss, humanity going wild, light actually fading, and now also the deep. The deep is rising as more dark things are sinking into the deep over time, making it grow, become more wild, more chaotic, and more visible in the current timeline. And it is full of various creatures and deformities. The cathedral of the deep seems to have idols of these various creatures that can live in the deep. If you look at the statues and iconography, deformities of various kinds are all represented in the art here. The cathedral knight armour also implies that the creatures of the deep are repulsive, and so these statues are most likely meant to represent some of these. Now let us also consider the following from the Deep Protection Miracle. It says, "The deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, but became the final resting place for many abhorrent things." So we can see that this tale implies that things are falling into the deep and making it worse over time. We can probably assume that the teachings in game about what things live there and what's happening with the deep comes from the Cathedral of the Deep and Aldrich's followers, who are no doubt communing with things from the deep and looking into the deep itself. As time has passed, more dark and abhorrent things have sunk into the deep, making it more dangerous and chaotic. For those who think that the deep is just another representation of the same abyss, I would ask you to consider this: the water. There's actual evidence in game that there's a different place. Firstly, like I said, there's water. There's water everywhere in the Cathedral of the Deep, and other places of where the deep worship is prevalent, such as Aldrich's Faithful's Covenant Room. Yes, it could just be water, but consider it instead it's a representation of a place where the rising power of the deep is seeping through the fabric into our world. There's also a lot of corruption in the Cathedral of the Deep coming from the ground, again possibly indicating how close this place is to the metaphysical realm of the deep. It's also a fact that in game they are both treated differently as their own separate things. Both the abyss and the deep are mentioned. However, I would postulate that the abyss is now a kind of known factor of the dark for the inhabitants of this universe, whereas the deep is aldrich and unknown. The dark is known to be accursed. Carla straight up says she is an accursed child of the abyss. The master pyromancer refuses to teach the grave warden pyromancies, knowing the Karthus fell to the abyss. Indeed, many have seen or come into contact with the abyss or its entities. However, the deep is far more elusive and unknown plane of existence that lingers in a state beyond our actual physical world. The deep gem also tells us of the deep's connection to the dark and the otherworldly nature of this place. It says, "There is a darkness that lies beyond human ken." Now this tells us that there's a dark beyond our understanding. This isn't in the dark gem. This is in the deep gem. Dark Souls is a game of high fantasy and metaphysical ideas where normal geography and time doesn't apply. The deep is a place beyond our normal understanding of physics, of times, and everything else. It is beneath our world, but not physically, much like the myth. It simply exists beneath the fabric of our world, and has stronger contact with our world in some places rather than others. It is also an important quote because it reiterates the fact that we may never fully understand the form the deep water abyss actually takes, just that it is there, growing, and it is an aquatic manifestation of the dark. As mentioned before, I believe in places where the contact with the deep is strong, such as the Aldrich Faithful Covenant Room, items from the deep water abyss seem to seep through, such as the Soul Dreg and the Deep Gem and the water itself. I don't believe the deep is completely separate from the rest of the dark. I just think that it's a different manifestation of the dark. The fire is fading, and this deep water, this deep dark, is rising, dregs the dark parts of the soul, and dark things are sinking into its depths, making it more volatile and more prevalent. The Deacon Set item description tells us that the cathedral was a place meant to seal away the horrors of the deep, suggesting a growing contact with the deep and a need to deal with it, although of course this church ends up worshipping the deep. The Merkmen are another great piece of evidence of this. The weapons they wield do dark damage, but they tell us that they are damp and that they have risen from the depths. They even can assume the form of soul dregs that charge at you. To me, these Merkmen are formed of the dregs, or dark parts of humanity, which have sunk into the deep, and cause the end of the world, the end of fire, is so close. The deep is literally rising through the fabric of reality of our world, which allows these dregs, these human Merkmen, to come through from the deep and into our world. To surmise this second point, the deep is like an abyss, but different. It is a metaphysical realm of water, a symptom rising of the dark, that is building with every rekindling. They are both different aspects of the same force, the abyss and the deep. They both represent the dark. And as the fire fades and the dark goes stronger, the deep is starting to push against the fabric of our world. And this links to my final point, my final myth, and what I believe Aldrich saw coming. 3. The Flood of the Dark. At this point in the game's mythos, a large amount of themes have to do with the fire fading and failing. The world we know is coming to an end. Throughout history, myths have often presented a semi-apocalyptic event, wiping out a swollen and corrupt civilization, whose time has well passed, and often this is represented by a flood. Noah, from the Judeo-Christian belief, comes to mind, but there are many other myths, such as the Mesopotamian flood myth. I believe that this metaphysical, aquatic manifestation of the dark has reached breaking point, to where even the cyclical nature of the relinking of the fire will be irrelevant, as a toll has to be paid for the amount of dark that has built up through the repeated denials of a natural age of dark, starting with the first sin. A deluge has built, and with every linking it has got stronger, and now it is beginning to seep through the cracks in our world, and soon the dam will break. The deep will flood, bringing about an age of water, a different age of dark, if we continue to deny the natural progression of the fading of the fire and the age of dark. Much like the biblical flood, the slate will be wiped clean, and like Noah, Aldrich has seen it coming and he is prepared for it, except instead of building a boat, he has devoured the gods of the old age in order to prepare and survive for the flood that is coming. So thanks guys, that is my kind of nation of the deep, based on some research I've been doing for a couple of months on where the deep came from, because most things in the game are inspired from real world myths, and then I thought I could track it back to what it's meant to actually represent, because for me just saying that it is another word for the abyss is not satisfying, because there are a couple of things that don't quite tie into that. So of course a lot of it's my speculation, but I hope you enjoyed my explanation. Thank you.